All right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to have you all here in DC. My name is Shalin Jyotishi. By day, I work right down the street at the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. Really looking forward to having you all at APLU tomorrow for the second half of the workshop. At APLU, I work on economic development issues with administrators of public research universities, and my policy portfolio focuses on technology and innovation, so stuff like tech transfer, intellectual property, advanced manufacturing, and the like. But I'm here today with another hat. I also serve as the CEO of the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance. JSPG is a peer-reviewed publication managed by and for students, policy fellows, and young scholars. And we are very excited to be entering into a national policy memo competition partnership with NSPN, effective the NSPN Symposium in November. So I just wanted to give an overview of the journal and how it can be a resource to all of you and also your colleagues on campus, your friends, your peers, and others who are interested or engaged with science and technology policy. Whoops. It looks like my mouse is malfunctioning here. There we go. So JSPG is it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are completely open access, and as I said, managed by and for students, policy fellows, and young scholars or professionals who care about having all of our voices heard in science policy debate. JSPG was founded by these fine folks over here to the left. Max Bronstein was my predecessor as CEO. He founded the journal with two of his mentors. This is Kathy Olson, who formerly served as the COO of NSF and the first female chief scientist at NASA. She's really terrific. And Max and I both had the honor of calling the late Homer Neal our boss. Homer Neal was the vice president for research at the University of Michigan and a very prominent figure in science policy. Some of you may know Toby Smith at the Association of American Universities. Toby and Homer and Jennifer McCormick had co-authored a book on science policy that is really a very helpful tool for folks interested in this domain. So JSP was established in 2011 by Max and our colleagues. To date, we've published 14 volumes. Our structure includes an editorial board, a governing board, an advisory board, of which Kathy and Homer used to serve on the board as well, and an all-volunteer staff, which includes myself and two others. Why do we exist? Well, we exist to help students and young scholars of all academic backgrounds in the US, but also worldwide, get experience writing for policy and public audiences. It can be a challenge to get visibility or publications in traditional science policy peer-reviewed publications like Research Policy or Journal of Technology Transfer. And it can also be hard for folks who come from more of an academic background to get familiar with writing op-eds, policy memos, policy analyses, technology assessments, and the like. So, Max and some of these folks in science policy came together and said, well, why don't we just create a venue by which we can give students and young scholars a platform to contribute their expertise on some of these issues. JSPG serves policy for science audiences as well as science for policy audiences. So those who want to apply their technical background to policy matters, and those who want to apply their policy background to technical matters. So in the case of figuring out research funding portfolios or innovation policy at Department of Commerce, EDA, what have you. We are completely independent, we're open access, and we're intended for all levels of policy, not just federal, but state, local, science diplomacy is very much in our purview. And our scope really touches every corner of science, technology, policy debate, energy policy, space policy, environmental policy. The purpose of JSPG is to serve as a resource for students and young scholars. So we're very comprehensive in our scope. So this is a little bit on our scope. You can see some of our topics here. Won't spend too much time on that. Just a couple call outs here. We recently expanded the scope of the journal to also include the study of science communication, the sociological study of science communication. So there are a number of graduate programs popping up in the US, but especially in Europe, that are developing a science of science communication, and you know, we really wanted to cater to that audience as well. Some additional background, we have a global staff editor and Reach. The staff is a unique component of JSPG, so everyone on the staff serves in a volunteer capacity. We all have day jobs. But we're engaged with JSPG because we want to not just have our papers, you know, sit on our website. We actively reach out via outreach to organizations, individuals, media outlets, social media, and the like, to promote our authors and our published work, and inject them into policy discussions. We also partner with national and international initiatives to help students and young scholars get involved with science policy, including the ESEP Coalition, with which Aaron Heath, of course, co-chairs here at AAAS. The March for Science, the AAAS Force for Science effort, the Canadian Science Policy Center. We've had a number of partnerships with various groups and organizations. We're very collaborative. I want to make sure we're coordinating with all of our colleagues in this domain. Organizations have also sponsored or partnered with the journal on special issues, as we are doing with NSPN. Some of our past partners have included the Union of Concerned Scientists and CSPO at Arizona State, which is a science policy think tank within ASU. If you're interested in sponsorship, get in touch. We'd be happy to partner with your student organization and others on campus. Went over that a little bit more. Trying to be a little succinct here. So these are just some members of our advisory board. We have Neil Lane here, who is science advisor to President Clinton, Deborah Wint-Smith, the CEO of the Council on Competitiveness. Dr. Rush Holt, of course, is here from AAAS. Marcia McNutt, the head of the National Academies of Science. So I think our advisory board is really helpful for elevating the profile of these student voices in policy debate. What sets JSPG apart from other publications out there? You know, having the endorsement of some of these thought leaders kind of signals that it's important for young people to have a say, and an influential say, in policy discussions. My mouse is malfunctioning once again. Some of our governing board members, we have Melanie Roberts here. We have Elaine Sedenberg, who is a former editor-in-chief of JSPG. We have some of our editors here. Sorry, I want to stay in the view of the lens. And our staff, so we have Adriana Bankston as our Director of Communications. Gary Kerr is our Operations Officer, handles international outreach. He's completing his second PhD at the UK, first in physics and the second in science communication. But Gary's been with the journal for 6 years. He started out as an associate editor, then assistant editor-in-chief, then editor-in-chief, then our senior director of communications, and now he's our chief international and operations officer. And what we do is the staff exists to help promote the journal, come to events like these, and get the word out about JSPG as a resource. We also fundraise. I fundraise. I attempt to fundraise. So a little bit on our editorial process. I had passed out our flyer, which has our 2018 submission deadline, as well as our 2019 submission deadline. This flyer is also available on our website, sciencepolicyjournal.org. The other thing I passed out is our editorial guidelines, which gives you a sense of what kinds of documents are accepted for publication in JSPG. Op-eds, of course, are very popular, but also policy memos, technology assessments. Some people, especially in internet policy domains, have submitted a lot of technology forecasting pieces, which have been very fascinating to get a sense of the future of things like 5G, Internet of Things. Workshop proceedings, book reviews. JSPG has a broad scope of policy and public-oriented publication formats. And others are welcome on a case-by-case basis. So again, JSPG is just a vehicle to help students and young scholars. We want to be comprehensive in our scope. Talked about this a little bit. A little bit on policy memos. All of this information is included in the editorial guidelines. There's a chart actually on page 3. Policy analyses, technology assessments, op-eds, workshop reports, book reviews, and other formats. So what are other formats? Okay, well, other formats can include everything from white papers to consensus studies to more formal reports. There's an interesting piece published in the journal that's kind of a who's who in the internet policy domain. So it kind of does a landscape analysis of the various advocacy groups in internet policy. So a student who studies this had, I can't remember the campus, had wanted to put this out there as a resource for the profession. And also policy blueprints are another possible format, something to think about. Not recommendations for now, but maybe for the next 10 years or something. So this, if you think of what happened with quantum, NSF quantum, looking ahead longitudinally across the next decade, what do we need to do from a science policy standpoint? A little bit on the editorial process. We have an initial review that the editor-in-chief will work with the assistant editor-in-chief to put it through 2 review processes. We're very, very heavy on feedback. Every single article must receive significant feedback. That is the purpose of a peer review process for JSPG. If we just accepted submissions and they rejected and accepted, we would not be fulfilling our mission. So that's very important to us. This chart is included in the editorial guidelines that we passed out. And then we go through formatting, final review. There's an opportunity for you to include your professional biography, your social media handles, because we want to use that as a resource to promote the journal to reporters, to policy audiences, to groups like AAAS and APLU and others to help get the word out about what you wrote about. So our editors, our editorial board is comprised of our audience. Graduate students, policy fellows, and young scholars. Many of them are AAAS fellows. Many of them are AAAS fellow alumni who are still in our range. They offer expertise in their particular issue areas. Some come from environmental policy. Others study tech transfer for their doctoral program. Some people are they're law students and they have a strong background in intellectual property law. And others come from a business background. They're getting their PhD in management and they have some expertise in management of science technology. We do have a call for submissions for editors once a year. The call will be this fall, so if you or your colleagues would be interested in serving on the editorial board, you can sign up for our mailing list at sciencepolicyjournal.org and you'll receive the submissions. And don't worry, we're a quarterly newsletter. We won't spam you. We also don't sell your data. So a little bit more on the editorial process. This is in the guidelines. The value of being an editor, this is also in the guidelines. You get visibility, you get experience in peer review, you develop some experience reviewing different publication formats. It's a way to bolster your research and writing credentials in the space. Some of our editors want to pursue careers in science policy, but others are just wanting to pursue their academic careers and they care about policy matters. So actually it's both audiences. It's not just people who want to do policy fellowships or come here to Washington or their state capital or embassies for global work. There are also people who want to get engaged with policy as a professional service while pursuing their academic career. So a little bit on value to the authors. Publications are picked up by media outlets through outreach. So some citations in CNN, Washington Post, CNBC, others. And we've brought on Adriana Bankston, our new communications director, as of 2 days ago. And Adriana is really eager to do more of that outreach here in the US, but then also looking internationally. We're having a call with The Guardian publication in the UK and others to help connect the dots. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me. I kept this a little bit succinct because I wanted to be mindful of Q&A time and your schedule here. All of our details are available on sciencepolicyjournal.org. My email is right there. It's sjotishi@sciencepolicyjournal.org. Don't hesitate to be in touch with any questions about the journal or anything else about our process or general tips, tricks, ideas for science policy, writing and research. We're on social media at SciPol Journal, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Mailing lists, and again, our 3 submission deadlines forthcoming are November 2018, April 2019, and November 2019. Those dates are included on the flyer I passed out at the outset of our talk. Thank you so much.
Let's give it 2 questions. Does anybody have any?
I'm wondering if you can speak to any of those programs you said that are opening up in Europe about the sociological study of science communication or science communication at all. More about that.
Sure, absolutely. You know, it's really interesting. Gary Kerr, our international officer, he's really been leading that for the journal. As it turns out, Europe is very they're sort of advanced in science communication scholarship, but also practice. There are entire associations convening science festival associations in Europe. And you know, the study of science communication, I think, has really picked up. The national academies have held a number of workshops over the past couple of years, which Alan Leshner, of course, was very engaged with, former CEO of AAAS. The other thing that has happened in recent years is there's been kind of a recognition that science policy and science communication really go hand in hand, that we need to do a better job of addressing scientific trust and understanding and reciprocity at the grassroots level in the US. Well, in the UK, that's been happening for quite some time. So, you know, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Gary or some of the other resources that have, you know, kind of signaled this growth in science communication interest in Europe. I know in Sweden, there's a national federally funded initiative to have science communication activities done at the K through 12 level, but also at the senior level. They have assisted living programs that have science communication support structures built in as part of their programming. That's very unique. We don't see stuff like that here in the US very often. You know, it's because of that JSPG, you know, we decided that the study of science communication is legitimate. People study this for a living, and we ought to give students an opportunity to write about that. So, any other questions? Yes. Oh, that's a great question. So I first was brought on with JSPG while I was an intern here in Washington at my now employer. I was a technology and innovation policy intern at APLU, and I had a call. Well, actually, it's a funny story. So I was, you know, Googling science policy. This was maybe 2012, 2011. And there really wasn't very much out there by way of resources. This was before NSPG existed. This was before student science policy groups became a thing. And if you're a student interested in science policy, you have the fellowships, and that's pretty much it. So, you know, I was doing some Googling on possible resources to help learn about science policy. I came across a presentation, a PowerPoint on the internet that had all this great content about science policy. And I said, wow, I need to talk to whoever wrote this presentation because they can help me figure out what I want to do. So I scrolled to the bottom and there's an email address there. So I emailed the person and said, well, you know, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm actually too busy. So here's 2 other people you can talk to. So it's like, okay, let me go talk to these others. By the way, that person, I know she won't mind if I say this, is Melanie Roberts, who's now a very close friend and mentor, and she's on JSPG's governing board. So it's actually a funny story. But one of those contacts was Max Bronstein, my predecessor as CEO. So Max and I talked about science policy careers, you know, as we do, informational interviews. And shortly after, he invited me to join JSPG as their communications person. And I've been with the journal since then. It's been maybe 4 or 5 years, and I assumed the role of CEO last May as Max became too busy and needed to rotate off in a senior advisor capacity. So that's how I learned about JSPG. Yes.
I'm just wondering, what is the most common submission?
So there's two answers there: the most common submission and then the most common publication. The most common submission are op-eds. Lots of op-eds. They're short, they're informed, but you can do them much more quickly and agilely than a policy analysis or technology assessment. We get a lot of op-eds. In terms of publications, I think we actually publish policy memos and policy analyses the most, because those publications tend to have the most depth to them and the most kind of novelty. Those publications seem to have something to say and not just kind of more of a thought piece. So, but having said that, all of these publication formats are important. Reason why we have such a broad scope is because depending on what you're seeking to do, you need to write an op-ed, or you need to write a policy memo, or you need to write an analysis. So being able to develop your skill set across those publication formats is a helpful tool, whether you want to work in this space or whether you want to be a scientist in industry or academia and contribute to policy as a professional service. So. Sure.
So you've written something, how do you know it's something that you can submit?
You can send an email to the editors. We are very open to having conversations about that. Again, JSPG is meant to be a resource. So if you have a pitch, just as you were to pitch it to a news outlet, you can pitch it to the editors and make sure it's something that's legible, and they'll be able to give you feedback on that.